Because if you look at the development and capital market, Hong Kong is still way ahead of China. Now, obviously, I mentioned that there are a lot of constraints within the China capital market, let alone all these, the free flow of renminbi, the constriction of foreign investor investing in China. By and large, China today is still a closed market. But as that market becoming more open and open, I think the way they look at the capital market and the Western world is firstly to look at Hong Kong first. And therefore, we are setting a very important example and precedent for the Chinese capital market to follow. Is things work here, work well, there are high possibility that it will also work in China, rather than they will try to implant something directly from US or Europe. So I think Hong Kong, we do have a very important role to play.
Well, as the stock exchange has mentioned, China will be their biggest market for the listing of companies within the next 5 to 10 years. So what we would have to do is to ensure that we maintain our standards. There cannot be two standards within one exchange. It cannot have a standard, for example, for Chinese companies and non-Chinese companies. What you have to do is to maintain one standard and enforce the standard rigorously and without fear or favor. In other words, a level playing field. So that's where our contribution can lie, because China will need a gateway, right? And that gateway is basically Hong Kong. Can the Chinese capital markets develop? If this question were posed 2 years ago, then the answer may have been a qualified yes. But at the moment, it has to be in the negative. And all you have to do is just look at the exchanges on the mainland, right? Ask yourself the question, which are the worst performing exchanges globally? And the mainland markets will always come up as one of them within that list. So Hong Kong has a very useful purpose to serve, because we can help raise the standard. But we have to make sure that the companies that list in Hong Kong will comply with Hong Kong rules, and we should not compromise our standards just to expand the market across the border.
Well, I think Hong Kong is making a contribution by bodies like HKICS, involvement with counterparts in the mainland. I know that the regulators have quite close liaison with regulators in the PRC. We do get delegations coming to Hong Kong. You get Hong Kong delegations going up to mainland China. I think Hong Kong is and will continue to provide a lot of the training and a lot of the practical examples and assistance of how to instill corporate governance in mainland companies. And you will see it with increasing investment by international companies in PRC companies. They will export, or the PRC companies will hopefully import some of those corporate governance practices from those other international companies.
I mean, I think in terms of the media, that obviously there's been tremendous changes in the domestic media. I mean, one of the areas where there is the greatest freedom and the greatest scope for challenging vested interests in China is through business reporting. And we've seen some very, very interesting pioneering type work done by media such as 21st Century Business Herald, Taijing Magazine and others. So I think they are exerting their, a very real influence in terms of companies. And I think it's seen as having a strategic importance by the leadership of actually having a vibrant financial media. In terms of the SCMP, I think we are probably marginal, as are most of the Hong Kong media, for as long as those companies remain insulated behind a restricted capital account. We certainly have quite an influence, we would hope, in terms of the way the H-share and the Hong Kong listed companies behave. But I think we will principally be observers of events in China, rather than perhaps directly driving them until that distinction between the two centres sort of breaks down.
I think actually one of the best ways Hong Kong could strengthen corporate governance on the mainland is through the the way we manage the listing process in Hong Kong of mainland companies. I think that if we required companies that are being listed to meet higher standards than they're currently meeting, and when I say we, not just the regulator but the market, when we look at these IPOs, some of them aren't bad, but some of them clearly have very weak corporate governance structures. When you read the prospectuses of these companies, which is a very exciting thing to do, you see that often the independent directors don't make a lot of sense, the audit committee doesn't look very strong, the internal governance structures don't look strong, and the company has a lot of connected transactions. So I think the market in Hong Kong could demand a lot more of mainland companies that list in Hong Kong. I mean, clearly the market is always looking at the upside growth, and that's why they're buying into a company. But given that there's always a lot of potential problems with IPOs, I think it's in the market's interest to demand much higher standards of governance before the companies come to market. So, for example, if a company comes to market and it's just appointed its independent directors 2 weeks or 2 months before, if I was an investor, I would ask that company. I wouldn't rate that company as highly as I would rate a company that has had its independent directors in place for a year or 18 months.
The greatest contribution Hong Kong makes is to have a liquid capital market in which companies in the mainland choose to list and subject themselves to rules and regulations and scrutiny that is the same as all other markets in the world.
While we understand that the mainland, they have been developing their standard and also their corporate governance practice by leaps and bounds, the role of Hong Kong probably, as far as I reckoned it, is to continue to make the capital market of Hong Kong as efficient as possible, so that then there should be a positive diffusion of our better practice back to China, so that they can have a more direct and immediate benchmark. This is I would say, as I reckon it, this is a much better way for us to influence China rather than having a direct feeding of our own system into their mouth.
Globally, company secretaries are playing an increasing role in ensuring companies maintain high corporate governance standards. This is particularly true in mainland China, where the speed with which new corporate governance regulations come into force means that it is essential for directors to have a reliable and qualified professional to advise them on their corporate governance obligations. As we have seen, mainland companies listed overseas, in Hong Kong, the United States, or Singapore, for example, also need to comply with the increasingly demanding listing rules of these jurisdictions. In such cases, company directors will rely on company secretaries for advice on the new corporate governance requirements they are taking on. The profession of company secretary is still relatively new in mainland China. While the listing rules of the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock exchanges include numerous references to the duties and rights of company secretaries, there is still no mention of the company secretary in China's company law. We asked our guests how company secretaries can help promote corporate governance value in China, and whether their status in mainland companies is likely to increase as their role in corporate governance compliance is recognized.
The company secretary plays a very important role. He is the first line of defense for a corporation facing complicated changes in the legal and regulatory environment. If a company secretary is good, the level of corporate governance will improve. However, he can't do all the work himself. The important thing is for him to make the directors, CEO, and CFO take part with him in the implementation of laws and regulations. They work together, and he plays a large role in communication and coordination. Since the directors can't do a lot of the concrete work, they have to support the company secretary in this. And they have to be able to listen to his advice on problems related to law and regulations. That's very important.